all the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right. It is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025, the 136th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. And also a big hello out there to Badlands Media and the Badlands Media audience. Today, I am having a conversation with a man named Constantin von Hoffmeister. He is the editor-in-chief of the Arktos Journal. His Substack is eurosiberia.substack.com. And he is also the author of this here book, Multipolarity, which I would recommend to all of you highly. Let me go ahead and bring him in. Constantine, welcome. Yep, there you go.
Hello. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Great to have you here. And I hope that I said Hoffmeister correctly, and it's not Hoffmeister.
No, Hoffmeister is correct. Thank you.
Excellent. And it's eurosiberia.substack.com, right?
Yeah, or just eurosiberia.net.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So I guess first, tell us about Arktos Journal, because I think that it's the sort of thing that would be very appealing to Americans who are awakening to the understanding that it's not just about having Republicans in office. There's really a much bigger change going on in the world.
Well, I think there's a paradigm shift going on and what they call vibe shift in America. Arktos Journal is a website of the publishing house Arktos. I'm the editor-in-chief of Arktos. The publishing house was founded in 2009. I would say it is probably the #1 publisher of new right and traditionalist literature in the English language. So we publish works by Alexander Dugin, for example, Jason Trojani, and Alain de Benoit, the French New Right writers, classic ones like Guillaume Fay, also Julius Evola, all the classic works. So we have like over, I think, 280 books, almost 300 that we've published already.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, we on average we publish like 2 or 3 books a month. We just published one yesterday. Actually, was released. It was called The Propaganda Society by Jean-Yves Le Gallou, is a French author, and it's about the modern West, basically, how the modern West claims that it only provides information to the populace, when in reality it is brainwashing the populace and using all kinds of propaganda to manipulate the minds of the masses, so to speak. And it's quite a short book, and it's an easy read, just like lays out what's going on in the West today, basically. So it's just one example of the books that we publish. I've been with Arktos for about 6 years, started in 2019. I'm the editor-in-chief, so my responsibility is to oversee the editing process of the books to make sure everything's correct with the content, and also check for grammar, style, etc., and choose the titles that are then added to the catalog. We have some
pretty busy schedule for the amount of writing you do as well.
Well, that's true, because I'm also responsible for ArktosJournal.com, which is like the sort of newsletter also on Substack that Arktos puts out, on which you publish on average like an article per day, usually like some in-depth analysis of current events or history, culture, metapolitics by a wide variety of authors. Some Arktos authors, but also outside authors, so like guest authors, so to speak. And we always welcome new writers, of course, to write articles for us. And we started this media project, Arktos Journal, about 2 years ago, so it's fairly new, and it's still growing. So I think we have about 8,000 subscribers now on Substack, which is not too bad. So, and yeah, I also edit all the articles for Arktos Journal, which is like additional work for me, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, so basically we try to spread the message of traditionalism and conservative right-wing values. And I think now is the time to really grow in this field.
I absolutely agree with you. And maybe you provided a jumping off point to what the rest of our discussion will probably be about. I wonder if you might see propaganda itself as an outgrowth of unipolarity, because I would put forward the notion that we actually have a global propaganda media apparatus, and that is the whole of global media. I don't think that there's really a substantial media presence that's not part of that thing until maybe the last few years, when we've had the growth of social media and true independent journalism. Now, independent journalism is just kind of becoming a brand that people who used to be on mainstream television will use to up their street cred again. But yeah, propaganda seems to me to be a product of unipolarity, and the same urge toward fragmentation that we can understand with multipolarity seems like the solution for media as well.
Well, I completely agree with you, but then I think the word propaganda is sort of like a bad rep, because people automatically think of like George Orwell in 1984, Animal Farm, when they hear, or like the Nazis or the communists, when they hear the word propaganda. I'm quite neutral, to be honest. I don't even think that the word propaganda should have negative connotations, because in reality, like all societies use propaganda. And I wouldn't even say that it's necessarily negative. Like in the Third Reich, for example, you have Joseph Goebbels, and he was actually officially called the Minister of Propaganda. So they didn't even try to hide it. They were quite open. They didn't say he's the Minister of Information. They said he's the Minister of Propaganda, and he works for the Propaganda Ministry. And I thought it was very refreshing, this honesty. Yes. So as long as you're open about it, that you propagate certain ideas or values, because that's what propaganda is all about, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So what I'm opposed to is the kind of woke, leftist, degenerate, insane propaganda that we're subjected to on a daily basis in the West, or at least have been subjected to, because I think it is slowly fading, especially in the United States, with the advent of the golden age in January of this year. I was actually in Washington, D.C. at the Watergate Hotel for a pre-inauguration ball. Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a Passage Press ball. And yeah, it was great atmosphere in DC in general. I stayed like a week there, like met a lot of people, walked around the streets, like wearing the black, dark MAGA hat. Didn't get arrested, like was wearing it. Yeah. I had the same one. Yeah, I was wearing it while I was walking around DC. Yeah, even went to the Exorcist staircase in Georgetown. Yeah, I went to a restaurant there, like people gave us funny looks, but yeah, nobody harassed us or was aggressive because I was wearing the hat. So I guess it is a completely new age, because wearing the MAGA hat in public, I don't know, like 2 years ago would have been unthinkable in Washington, D.C.
I used to wear my Keep America Great hat and go on runs around the Hollywood Reservoir, which is a popular kind of outdoor walking and hiking spot right in Hollywood. I just listened to people scream at me the entire time and just kept running, showed up again, saw their faces every day. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
To go back to propaganda just for a second, though. So under that definition of propaganda, the way you just described it in Germany, officialized as it was, that's just basically inclusive of all political messaging under that umbrella term at that point. I think that that's entirely different. You're right, from the negative connotation that we assume propaganda is a very specific kind of dishonest political messaging, when really it's basically all political messaging.
Well, that's my point, right? Like everything is basically propaganda, whether it's from the right or from the left. So we just need the right kind of propaganda, because there's actually nothing wrong with manipulating people, in my opinion, because even the term manipulation has sort of a negative connotation. But I don't even think it's a bad thing, because I mean, I would say people in general, right, are quite malleable, so to speak, and they're quite receptive to new ideas, and they're very receptive to change, right? Because most people don't want to stick out, they want to conform. It's just, I suppose it's human nature, right? And I mean, people say, okay, like we live in the woke liberal West right now, and it will be like this until, I don't know, the end of time. It's simply not true. And again, you can look at the history of different European nations, how fast regimes can change and how fast people adapt to the new regime. Like, again, you can look at Germany, for example. You had like 1871, when the German Empire came into existence after Prussia defeated France in the Franco-Prussian War. Then you had like the Imperial Germany with the Kaiser and all that stuff. Then you had World War One. After World War One, the empire was abolished and the German Republic, the Weimar Republic, came into existence. People immediately forgot about the fact that only like 4 years before they were subjects of the emperor. Now they were happy subjects of a democracy, of a parliament, so to speak, and nobody better than Eylet. Then the Nazis came to power in 1933. Most people became faithful to the new regime, put the portraits of Hitler behind their desk in the office, it's in schools and so on. Then Germany lost the war. Half of Germany became communist, dutifully marched in the May Day parade with images of Stalin. The other half went to McDonald's and worshipped the American democratic system. So, I mean, I would say it's the same in the United States, right? You had like this woke insanity under the Biden administration and before under Obama, with a 4-year interlude of the first Trump administration. And
in many ways, it actually was ramped up during that first Trump administration, because that was when we had the Black Lives Matter incidents, the women's marches, Me Too, all of that. It was like go time. So Trump provided a counter to the woke ideology incoming. But man, it didn't slow down at any point during that time. We just had somebody fighting back and kind of teaching us how to fight back.
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed in the first Trump administration, to be honest, because like Trump didn't really crack down on the BLM Antifa riots as he should have, in my opinion. So it was a bit disappointing. But of course, you're right. It became even worse during the first Trump administration. And then, of course, you had Biden, even though probably Trump got elected, but anyway, maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because now he's even more radical than he would have been if he had been president instead of Biden. And to be honest, when I was in DC in January, like I expected thousands and thousands of counter protesters on the Washington Mall, but there were hardly any. Right, there were some women in the pussy hats and some Antifa people with like different placards and posters screaming, but just like very few not many. And yeah, I mean the pro-Trump people completely outnumbered, like the leftists, which is also a sign.
We are not, by the way, we're not truly a 50-50 country here. It's not even close to that. Like I would tell you, I believe that MAGA has like a vast, overwhelming majority.
Yeah, absolutely.
MAGA also has that within the Republican Party as well. There's not anybody really to resist it in any serious way because they've all just been shown to be so corrupted already.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. I was listening to a podcast by Steve Charlie this morning, and he actually said he thinks it's about 80% you have like MAGA support basically in the United States, with only like the woke crazies is like 20%. I think that's pretty much true. And you can also sense the vibe shift in like places like Walmart or Target, for example, because now you have the Pride Week, for example. Yes, but hardly anybody cares about Pride Month, right? Hardly anybody cares about Pride Month anymore. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Turley showed like an image of Target, right? Normally it's like decked out in all the rainbow flags, and now it's just like proud American flags, basically. So, and I also read a couple of weeks ago that even Walmart got rid of all the pro-LGBTQ nonsense, basically, in their stores. I think you can probably also sense it in Hollywood, even though it's too early to tell. So we'll see. But it's definitely happening.
Yes, I agree. I spent 20 years of my adult life nearly in Hollywood and know a number of people from Hollywood. I got firmly exiled from there for speaking out throughout 2020 and for, wearing my MAGA hat around the Hollywood Reservoir, that sort of thing. But the industry there is the main industry that it was is in significant trouble and has recognized that. And then there are some companies, some writers, some actors beginning to work on parallels to that industry to continue making films and television shows eventually. But yeah, I think that we're in a moment of the parallel popping up. It's less the thing itself shifting, although that'll come later. This is the possibility of alternatives and money flowing a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have some friends in Los Angeles. I was there last year in March. Cool. And a good friend of mine, Isaac Simpson, he has the Carousel podcast, also on Substack and YouTube. Well, he has good connections, I suppose, to like film industry people. And I also know other people in Los Angeles that sort of work in the film industry. And pretty much everybody told me that even in Los Angeles, like it's changing, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not taboo anymore to speak openly about being pro-MAGA or being pro-Trump at like Hollywood insider actor parties or the producers, directors hang out. I think more and more people are being outspoken about it.
Yeah. We don't know each other, so let me just tell you this quickly. Most of the audience will know. I used to work in Hollywood nightlife and celebrity relations. And so my job was knowing as many people in that community as possible. And there was no space for that whatsoever in 2020. It would have to be you were huddled in a corner in some dive bar. There was no you can just go speak these things outwardly. And then, of course, in 2020 and early 2021, we also had the so-called pandemic shutting everything down. So it's good that it's expanded since then.
Well, I think in the United States, you can really see a fundamental transformation taking place. Like I was in the US several times last year and this year, and I can totally feel it. Like I lived in the US for 13 years. I went to university. Wow. Yeah, I went to university in New Orleans.
Oh, cool.
And also went to college in New Hampshire, went to high school in Arizona. And
wow. Okay, so you've been around the country. I
have, yeah. Traveled to lots of states.
Very cool.
Except I think almost every state except Hawaii and Alaska. So yeah, I love it. I love America. I'm totally pro-American. I've always been pro-American, but now I'm especially pro-American ever since MAGA actually came to power, because now I see the United States as one of the two poles that represent the true West, so to speak, because I don't see it in Europe anymore. Like, for me, Western Europe is totally gone, basically. I wouldn't even consider it part of the true West at this particular moment. I hope the situation will change, but I am not so sure it will. But we'll see, I suppose.
What would you say about Eastern Europe along those lines?
Well, that's a second pole, right? So I said the United States is one pole of the true West. I would say Russia is the second pole. So Russia and the US also lived in Russia for over 10 years. So I know Russia quite well, also traveled extensively there. And I think that Russians in general have a lot in common with, say, MAGA Americans, because the mentality is almost identical, I think, and the values are the same. So they're totally compatible. So there's absolutely no reason for any kind of animosity between these two groups, in my opinion. And Russians in general are not anti-American either, right? Because I know a lot of Americans that still live in Moscow today, right? And they never left, even though there's a war going on. And they never encounter any kind of hostility or anything at all. I mean, they live there, they work there, and they don't hide their identity or anything. So, yeah. I mean, it's totally not true what they're saying in the West, that it's like, oh, it's dangerous if you go to Moscow as an American or as a Western European. I would even say the opposite is true. Usually they're very curious and they're quite happy when people visit their country. So, yeah, or even live there. Yeah. And they're proud of it. So
I've said before on my podcast, I'm not sure if on Badlands, but that at times I think it's worth considering if Russia, as it actually exists, not as we're told it is here in the West, here in America, might actually represent the ideals our country was founded on better than we do at this point. And that is concerning for me, but it's hard to deny with what we've seen, how we've seen Russia act on the world stage in comparison to how the United States has acted prior to Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, I always say that, I'm in Western Europe at the moment, and in Western Europe, like people like you and I are basically in the minority, right? Especially in West Germany, not so much in East Germany, but in West Germany, you always have to be careful what you say in public when you're in a cafe, in a restaurant. I suppose it's very similar to what it was like in the US during the dark Obama or even early Biden years. And it's not like this anymore in the US, but it's still like this in West Germany. But in Russia, it's the complete opposite. In Russia, like, our values, my values, your values are basically society's values, and they're the norm, which means the vast majority of Russians basically think like you and I, right? And not like the woke liberals. And that's what I find so refreshing. Every time I go to Russia, I can speak openly about all the quote unquote taboo topics. And the same is true in like the red states, the heartland in the United States, because people are very understanding and they're usually on the same page.
And non-confrontational. Russia actually, I think, might even be ahead of us. You know, we often think that we're like the world's leader in technology and advancement, and perhaps that's true. But the direction we are headed in as a world right now is toward that fragmentation, toward that decentralization, toward those traditional cultural frameworks, as you talk about in the book. Russia seems to be ahead on that timeline, heading in that direction. Like they've been heading in the right direction for longer than we have.
Yeah, I think it has cultural and historical reasons, because Russia as a construct was never a nation state. It's basically always been an empire. And it's always been I would say, multinational, multi-ethnic, and multi-confessional empire. Well, the majority of citizens of this imperial construct called Russia are still ethnic Russians, I think over 80%, but you have sizable minorities of especially Muslims in like Chechnya, Dagestan, Tatarstan, and you also have Buddhists in Buryatia, for example, and large ethnic groups that basically have autonomous status within the empire has always been the norm in Russian history. So you had the Russian Empire until the Bolshevik Revolution. Then you had the Soviet Union, which in itself was still an empire. It basically was still the Russian Empire with a different social system, but it was still multi-confessional, multi-ethnic, and centralized with Moscow as the imperial capital. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, now of the Russian Federation, which is, again, an imperial construct. And right now, I think we live in a new age of empires, basically, because I think the days of the nation states are gone irretrievably, in my opinion, because now the only true sovereign actors on the world stage are civilization states. And a civilization state is basically the technical term for an empire. It's basically when you have a civilization, a culture, where the people feel connected through either language, ethnicity, or a combination of different factors. That makes up a civilization. But when this civilization also has a political state in which it can flourish, then you have a true empire. And I think this is obviously the case with Russia, but not only Russia. I think it's also the case with China, obviously. It's the case with India, and it's the case with the United States. So I think now we have basically 4 civilization states at this particular moment. So we have the US, we have Russia, we have China, and we have India. Because Islam, for example, I would say it's a civilization, obviously, the Islamic civilization, but it's not a unified state. So it's not an empire, it's not a civilization state. It might become one in the future, but at the moment it isn't, right? It's totally fractured into nation states that are constantly at odds with each other. The European Union, I would say, is not a civilization state because it's too weak. Yes, it doesn't have true sovereignty. Yes, because to be a true civilization state, to be an independent actor on the world stage, you need independence. And in order to be independent, you need to be sovereign. And how are you truly sovereign? You're only truly sovereign if you have nuclear weapons, right? If you don't have nuclear weapons, you can't be. You can't be sovereign. I mean, there's a reason why the U.S. never invaded North Korea, but why they invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, right? I mean, if Saddam had nuclear weapons, I highly doubt the U.S. would have attacked, right? So
perhaps I would suggest maybe as far as North Korea is concerned, the Chinese and Russian protection, not that it's like a formal thing, but the last thing the Chinese and the Russians would have wanted is for an American military adventure to begin in North Korea, considering that there's already an American military adventure in South Korea, which essentially composes the entire South Korean state.
No, you are. Well, that's another reason, of course, because you have different geopolitical alliances. But I still think that in order to be a truly sovereign actor, to truly have deterrence, it's only nuclear. And this is why, in my opinion, France is the only semi-sovereign state in Western Europe. Well, same with Britain, but it's outside of the European Union. So I would say Britain, France are basically the only semi-sovereign states, even though they also, I think, are somewhat beholden to the United States. I would say other states, especially Germany, are like total vassal states, basically like American colonies almost. I mean, Germany is an occupied country, right? I mean, it's been occupied since 1945, and we have like thousands of American troops on German soil. You have nuclear weapons on German soil, but they're all American-owned and American-controlled. And the German government has basically no say over what happens with these weapons or what goes on behind the walls of the American bases in Germany, like Ramstein, for example, the famous Air Force base, the U.S. Air Force base in Germany, from which they flew all kinds of missions to the Middle East, and still do, I suppose. So it's not a sovereign actor. And I would say the same is true of Italy and Spain. They're just too weak. That's why the European Union cannot be considered a civilization state, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would. So let's talk a little bit about how you think the world is arrayed right now, and I want to give you my idea about it and let you respond to that. So I will traditionally talk about these things in what I call good twin, evil twin. I believe that we have the push and pull between, as I hope we'll get into later, the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, those different value sets toward traditional, and then it goes back toward this worldly, materialist value set that we have right now. And it goes back and forth on that over time. But at the top of the worldly, materialistic value set is a control apparatus of global bankers and then levels of global governance that then infiltrate, steal elections, take over countries, and then provide a centralized governance to all of those states, which are essentially proxy states. And I would suggest that the changeover in World War II was that the control hub went from the UK to the United States, and then with kind of the head of the body over in Israel. And these things essentially controlled the world because of this quote unquote international empire, which is really just a global governing body and the military that subdues the states that they mean to take over. And so I think about these things going back and forth. And under that model, then we see nations pulling away from the centralized apparatus, as I would suggest the United States has done, and some of the countries in Eastern Europe have done. But that European Union is still fully under the sway of that same global centralizing top-down control apparatus.
Well, I would say that European Union is now the headquarters of global homo, so to speak, because America is out. So now it's the European Union. And again, specifically Germany, I think, is the main headquarters because it's economically still the most powerful nation in the European Union. So I think it has completely shifted, right? And the globalists are in total panic mode because, as you said at the very beginning of the show, you said that the tide is also turning in Europe. And I think it is turning, at least with the populace, because you have these populist right-wing parties gaining momentum in a variety of European nations. Like you have the AfD in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, the second strongest party now. You had Le Pen's party, the National Rally in France, at almost number one, I would say. And, well, you know what happened in Romania, of course. We can talk about this in a second. Then in Poland, the right-wing candidate just won a few days ago. So you can sense it everywhere, that people are sick and tired of the liberal regime that they basically have to suffer under. And they're trying to break out of it. And this is very evident in the results of the different elections. And I think the globalists who are in charge still, they don't really know what to do. They don't really know how to contain it. So they're using all kinds of repressive measures, basically, to keep the status quo intact. Like in Romania, for example, you had Georgescu, the presidential candidate. He was basically in the lead a few months ago. He won the first round of presidential elections. Then they were supposed to have a second round, and he most likely would have won the second round as well. And then he would have been the president of Romania. And he's basically the Romanian MAGA candidate, right? Like he's a staunch nationalist, a traditionalist, very, very religious, orthodox. And they just annulled the second round of presidential elections by claiming there was Russian interference on TikTok like the Russians somehow manipulated TikTok, and they never ever
they did it here on Facebook in 2016.
Yeah.
Don't you know that
Yeah,
that's
it's crazy.
why Trump won?
Exactly. No, I know. I mean, and they never provided evidence. They just said it, and so they just canceled the elections basically.
Yeah.
And then they had new elections a few months later, and again Ceausescu was going to run in the new elections, and then they just barred him from even participating because he's a fascist or he's a racist, anti-Semite. They just made stuff up basically, right? So he wasn't even allowed to run, and instead another nationalist ran. Who was good, George Simeon, and he was good friends with Ceausescu. So both basically staunch nationalists. George Simeon had a very good chance of winning the presidential election, and he just narrowly lost to the pro-EU candidate, most likely with interference, especially from France, like Pavel Durov, the owner of the Telegram app. He basically said that he was approached by the French government to suppress like conservative messages about the election, basically. And so there was massive interference by the EU. I mean, the fact that they canceled the first elections, for me, it already means that the second one was illegitimate in the first place. So I mean,
they don't care about democracy. It's not like
democracy is
it's not like they're like, we just don't care about democracy this time. But now, of course. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. And then they did something similar with Marine Le Pen in France, right? I mean, they accused her of basically misappropriating, like I think, campaign funds. You know, like spending the money that she got for her party where she shouldn't have spent the money, basically. And she's probably guilty, right? But the point is that pretty much everybody was doing it, or is still doing it, what she was accused of doing. And of course, she was singled out for political reasons, obviously. I think it's very similar to what happened to Trump, this weird thing where he was basically accused of taking home like confidential documents and
with no evidence whatsoever.
But then didn't they find out that Biden did exactly the same thing?
Of course.
And then
yes. And I would say the same model is happening everywhere.
That's my point, though, right?
Yes.
But what happened is that they always single out the political opponent for things that everybody else is doing, basically. I mean, it's very obvious. So I mean, and now Marine Le Pen might go to jail for like 4 or 5 years. And she's not allowed to run in the presidential election, which she most likely would have won, right, in a couple of years. So now somebody else has to run in her place, which sort of lowers the National Rally's chances of coming to power, because she was the focal point, like the most important figurehead of the party, so to speak. And in Germany, they're doing the same. Like the AfD is now the second strongest party. I think at like 25%, the ruling party is the Christian Democratic Union at like 27%, so only like 2% behind. And they're already talking about wanting to ban the AfD because a couple of weeks ago, the AfD was branded as officially right-wing extremists by the Orwellian Office for the Protection of the German Constitution. Yes. And then, of course, you also have to add the fact that unlike in the United States, you have absolutely no free speech whatsoever in Western Union, so you can't even properly voice your grievances without fear of being raided by the police at 4 a.m. and going to jail for, like, I don't know, mean tweets, basically. Like J.D. Vance basically said in his fabulous speech in Munich, like, everything that J.D. Vance said is absolutely correct. And that's why he was so demonized by the Western media and by Western politicians afterwards. Like Friedrich Merz, he's the chancellor, the new chancellor of Germany. Like he was very angry after J.D. Vance gave his speech in Munich, and he was interviewed by some German TV station, and he said, I don't understand why J.D. Vance said that we don't have freedom of speech in Germany. Of course we have freedom of speech, that you can say whatever you want. But of course, that does not include insults or hate speech. And there we go again, right? It does not include hate speech, but they never give you a proper definition. What exactly is hate speech? And isn't hate speech free speech? I mean, isn't that the whole point of free speech? But well, they don't understand what the concept of free speech means, right? Because you cannot have free speech, or you cannot say that you have free speech and then add that you can say everything you want, comma, except ... right? So as soon as you have a comma and except, then it already negates free speech, because then you don't have free speech. You can't have free speech with exceptions. That's an oxymoron.
Agreed. And we've had that discussion at length in this country. So many of us, myself included, were censored and banned from the legacy social media platforms. I was banned on Twitter for 2 years, banned on Instagram, banned on YouTube for a while, though back now. So we've dealt with that significantly. Myself, the Secretary of State of California actually filed a takedown request of content where I was speaking, and it appeared in a Freedom of Information Act request by this organization called Judicial Watch. So we had state actors directing the quasi supposedly tech and social media companies to censor American speech. They were operating as agents of the state, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of that. And I'm not quite the JD Vance supporter that you are, but he's not going far enough in my mind. And he hasn't gone far enough in America, because we have this thing where we were marketed very effectively and very strongly that Twitter, when Elon Musk took over, immediately became a free speech platform. The whole time having freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. The whole time Elon promoting certain voices on the platform that were very oriented toward the mainstream. We do not have a free speech outlet that the majority of America is on at this point. We're not there yet. So we've dealt with some of that, though not the prison sentences, generally speaking. But yeah, we're not the perfect example yet.
Well, I agree with you, of course. I also agree with you that JD Vance is not going far enough. Like he could do more, and I think the Trump administration could do more. Like, for example, when that nonsense happened in Romania, when they basically canceled the elections and stole the presidency, I think the Trump administration could have threatened Romania with sanctions, for example. I think that would have been completely appropriate. Unfortunately, they didn't. I mean, they complained about it on the White House X account, and I think JD Vance mentioned it. Elon Musk, of course, talked about it, but they're just words, right? Like, some actions should have followed, in my opinion. So that was a bit disappointing. I agree. I totally agree with you that there's no real mainstream total free speech platform anywhere in the world, right? Because even X, even under Elon Musk, they still censor people, they still suppress people, and they still delete accounts for things people say or things people post. Yes. So, but nothing is perfect, right? Of course. But what I wanted to say is, though, that compared to what is happening in Western Europe, the United States is still a free speech paradise. I mean, because what is happening to you guys in the US, I mean, it's reprehensible, of course, like canceling YouTube accounts, getting kicked off different social media. It's terrible, I agree. But you don't have the police, like 6-7 police officers knocking on your door at like 5 a.m, coming into your house, confiscating your computer, cell phones, everything for, I don't know, posting a meme on Facebook or liking the wrong comment on X. Because even liking sort of illegal content is illegal in the European Union. So when I'm on X, and I can't even look at some X profiles because the European Union has severe restrictions on X, and I think X complies, where they basically hide profiles for users in the European Union. You can look at them if you have a VPN, right? But without a VPN, they're blocked, and most people don't use a VPN, right? So, I mean, it's 100 times worse from what you have in the US, really, right? I mean, you have tons of websites that are blocked, like all the Russian websites, like RT, for example, right? Russia Today. It's actually now officially called RT. I'm like a regular columnist for RT. I write several articles per month. And I've been to their offices in Moscow, and I know people that work for RT. And I've always loved RT. And before the war, before the current conflict in Ukraine, I would only watch RT. Like before I go to sleep, I would watch RT. When I wake up, I would watch RT, the news on television, because it was perfectly acceptable. Now the war broke out, and they basically banned and blocked all Russian media channels in the European Union. So now you need a VPN to access the RT website, right? It's a big hassle. I can't watch it on my big screen TV anymore, right? Because it's too much hassle to install a VPN on it. So I just watch it on my phone or on my laptop. So I mean, yeah, I mean, the point is there's no freedom of information. There's no freedom of speech. Which is to some extent, which would be fine if the authorities or the establishment were at least honest about it. What bothers me the most is the hypocrisy, right? When they keep talking about freedom and democracy and the right to self-expression, when none of this is actually existent in Western Europe, in any shape or form. I mean, I could go on and on about it, to be honest. There's so many anecdotes.
I'm 100% on board with you about everything you're saying. In terms of the free speech thing, I want to maybe bring this back a little bit to the political messaging outside of propaganda. You talk about, again, traditional cultural frameworks in the book. Is there a way that we can pull outside of the propaganda, even as with no negativity involved, but just the idea of all this political communication and manipulation? I think that there might be something outside of that, and it's right in line with that return to traditional cultural values. It's demanding honesty at all times. And I'm guessing that you're probably familiar with Solzhenitsyn's Live Not by Lies, like that whole thing, because what you describe in Germany is what's described in the history books about Germany 90 years ago, and there's this strange way that people pretend that the ideologies matching up is irrelevant because they're not calling themselves the same names. They're not the Nazis, they're the anti-Nazis now. Sure, they're doing the same things as the Nazis, but now they're anti-Nazi. Don't you get it? And people are just like, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, the Europeans they have a society like ours. They could never get that way. And I look around America and where we have come to, we had forced medical experimentation in our country in 2021. And I don't see the difference between the regime. To me, it just looks like the same regime from back then that moves around all over the globe under different names, is controlling the United States, is controlling Germany. And obviously the control is going away in the United States, as I hope it is over time in Germany as well. But man, it's hard to distinguish between those things. And I wonder if the only way we can win the battle of the propaganda, rather than good propaganda beating bad propaganda, is to just say no propaganda, right? This is not true. This is not true. This is not true. This is not true. I don't care how it affects my political party. I don't care about any of that. I'm just saying these things aren't true. And therefore, whatever is left after that will at least not be part of the controlled opposition they set up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it's just semantics. Because what you're actually talking about is deception. There shouldn't be any deception from the side of the government. The government shouldn't lie to you. The government shouldn't deceive you, right? But while a propaganda doesn't necessarily have to be about falsehoods, it can also be about truth, right? You can just propagate the truth all day long without lying. And I see nothing wrong with it. And to expect a government, though, not to deceive the population, I think it's sort of naive, I would say, and too idealistic. I don't think it will ever happen anywhere. And I don't think it has ever happened anywhere in human history. I don't think there has ever been a society anywhere on the planet or a government that didn't to some extent lie to its people, whether it was for their own good or whether it was for the enrichment of the establishment is really besides the point. So I'm not really optimistic, and I'm not really looking forward to like some ideal utopian state in the future where we can trust the government 100%. I mean, that's never going to happen, in my opinion. I mean, the governments will always lie, and I'm talking all governments, right? It's just the nature of the beast, to be honest.
Perhaps, but that's, I think, why people like me, at least, want that beast to no longer exist, right? It's a further fragmentation where we don't have a government that speaks to us. You know, it's like, this is not, we don't need a government telling us how it is. Like, we are interconnected now and can tell each other how it is and demand certain things culturally. And over time, I think that we could return to something closer to the truth, but not handed down from government. I agree, government's not going to stop lying. I just think that the problem is beyond just the deceptive talk. It's like, I mean, I guess if the government in its smallest possible form is telling us only the truth, fine. But again, I just don't know if that's possible.
Well, I don't know. I'm with like Jack Nicholson here. Some people just can't handle the truth, right? And maybe maybe I think to some extent governments have to lie, and people actually want to be lied to. I think to some extent.
Want to be lied to. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true, and I'm not like a radical, like anti-government person. I'm not a libertarian, and I believe governments are necessary. And I would even argue that to some extent, the constructs that governments, or I would say the legends, the myths, the tales that governments tell people, are to some extent necessary. It just depends who's in charge of the government, and the people who are in charge of the government, are they actually doing things for the betterment of the population? Are they spreading certain tales for the benefit of the people or for the benefit of themselves? And I think there's a crucial difference here, right? So if it's for the benefit of the people, I think you need some kind of overarching narrative that unites people, that motivates people, and that encourages them to do better.
What do you think? Oh, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, sorry. I just wanted to give a quick example. Like in Russia today, like you have World War II, what is in Russia called the Great Patriotic War. I mean, there's no real free speech in Russia either, right? I mean, speech is also restricted, and people are also prosecuted for writing things and saying things, just like there are in Western Europe. The only difference is that people in Western Europe are prosecuted for very often for things they shouldn't be prosecuted for, saying things they shouldn't be prosecuted for, in my opinion. While in Russia, while I oppose prosecuting people for saying things, like the things that people say are rather distasteful in Russia that they're prosecuted for. So that's the difference, is that Russia has a conservative, traditional government that, in my opinion, does have the health, mental and physical, of its people at heart, basically. I think this is not the case in Western Europe. And they have this narrative of the Great Patriotic War, which is World War II, and it was a Soviet-Russian victory, obviously, the defeat of the Nazis. And I think, and they have this big military parade every year, and it unites the people because you have like this multi-ethnic, as I mentioned earlier, empire, and they need this sort of like unifying narrative, this sort of myth, basically, sort of like a founding myth. And I think it's the victory over fascism that is basically the founding myth of the new Russian state. And I think it works very well. And they do have certain laws that you're not supposed to spread lies about the Soviet heroes in World War II, etc. So basically, you're not allowed to question, to some extent, the official narrative of World War II that the Russian government presents to the people. But I think they're doing this because they don't want sort of like civil strife to ensue as a result of people questioning the narrative and thereby breaking the unity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's got to be a tough thing to handle as well, because I can imagine that some significant portion of the Russian population is beset with Western propaganda and the messaging about why this model is good and that model is bad. And so that thing, I think, would be a tough element to handle in a way that's not actually stepping on people's rights or privileges or freedoms, I guess, however you would define it in different places. But also, I wonder, you know, in your picture of how you lay these states out, and the fact that some level of deception might be a problem, some level of sense, or might be a necessity, just something that's going to happen, and some level of censorship will be as well. Do you believe that government of, by, and for the people is actually a possibility? Is that part of American mythology that doesn't resemble something real? And by the way, I think maybe it doesn't. And I just wish we could get back to that point where we could stop talking about our democracy and voting and elections and political parties, knowing all that is kind of nonsense and not how world leaders are determined, and move toward a more imperial understanding, because that's kind of what it is. You know, you got Putin, you got Xi, you got Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Maybe Modi would fit that sort of model. You got Trump in the US. These are leaders that are going to be in position regardless of what the media apparatus says about elections or term limits or anything like that. And when we're at that point, we should stop deceiving ourselves about the form of government. That's what I would argue. And I think that you're probably aligned with a good bit of that.
Yeah, to some extent, but I don't think it can be universalized. Like, you can't address the entire planet, basically. You have to address different civilizations, different cultures, because, I mean, what is good for one culture or one people is not necessarily good for another people. Yes. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of fascinated with North Korea. I think it's a really cool state with a really cool ideology, basically. And I find the history also quite fascinating, and their movies, their culture, and the way they run things. And sometimes I tell people this, and they say, well, if you love North Korea so much, why are you not a communist? Why don't you move to North Korea? And why are you talking about freedom of speech? Obviously, you hate freedom of speech. I said, well, that's not true, though, right? Because if a system is particularly suitable for one people, like the Koreans, doesn't necessarily mean it's suitable for another people, like Western Europeans or Westerners in general, because the history and the cultural background is completely different. So the Koreans have this sort of like Confucian mindset, right? And I think they've always had this sort of like leadership cult. I mean, even before communism. So for them, it's completely natural to live under such a system. And I think this is why the Democratic People's Republic of Korea works so well, because it is suitable to the sort of soul of the Korean people, or the character of the Korean people. And I would argue it's the same in Russia, because Russia, I would say, never really had free speech or real democracy, or democracy as Americans understand it. I mean, now officially it's a democracy, the Russian Federation, but it's not the same kind of democracy that you have in the US or even in Western Europe. I mean, some Russians say it is a sovereign democracy, which means it is a democracy in name, but in reality, Putin is basically Tsar, right, of the empire. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, because again, it suits the character of the Russian people, and the Russian people are used to it. That's all they've ever had throughout the history. It is their culture. It is their deep-seated tradition. So who are we to question this? Because you have the liberals saying, yes, well, it's not right, and he jails political opponents, and there's political repression, and elections are a sham, etc., and so on, blah, 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 and Putin is a dictator. I'm like, yeah, but what's wrong with a dictator in the first place? Why can't they have a dictator if they want to have a dictator? And he's been in power for too long, but why not? If he's a good leader and he's loved by the majority of his people, which he undoubtedly is, because I lived in Russia for over 10 years. So I've talked to many of them, and he's universally popular, Putin. People love him. And why shouldn't he rule for 25 years or more? Why not? The same with like Lukashenko in Belarus. I think it's also an ideal state for the Belarusian people. And that's the whole idea of multipolarity. You have to give each culture, or I'd say, I wouldn't say you have to give, but you should respect the integrity of each culture. You should respect their choice of government, their choice of leadership, and their choice of how they want to live their life. And we have no right to interfere, because that's what the liberals do, right? The liberals always want to interfere and say, well, women are oppressed in Afghanistan, the Taliban is evil, we have to bring feminism and gay rights to Kabul, and we have to topple Saddam because he's an evil dictator, and we have to install some democratic regime that is to our liking, and give them all the same kinds of rights that we enjoy, even though I would say a high percentage of these people don't even want these rights. I would even argue that the Taliban is quite popular in Afghanistan, and from what I've read
as well.
From what I've read, is like the majority of Afghans, they love the Taliban, and why not? It is their culture, it is their tradition. Who are we to say that is not good for them? I think it's their choice.
They also shut down the opium trade, the black market opium trade out of Afghanistan. The Taliban came in and shut that down. That's exactly. Really impressive.
Well, yes, well, I absolutely agree, of course, because it is, again, it goes back to deep-rooted traditions of particular ethnic groups or particular cultures and what is good for them. And going back to what you talked about, I think Americans in general are freedom-loving people. They're more individualistic than other peoples who are more collective-minded, like the Chinese. And I think it's fine, right? I mean, even the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, who's a staunch traditionalist, conservative, he acknowledges, I mean, it's the American way of life, and this is how Americans should be able to live, if that's how they choose to live, if that is part of their tradition, and I think it is. So I would say that the idea of direct democracy and freedom is, of course, extremely important for the United States, precisely because it's such an ingrained part of its culture and its spirit, and it should be implemented at all costs.
I'm just not sure we actually have that now.
No, you don't.
Our
you don't.
perception of what it is so skewed that I would prefer the cultural shift to occur where we understand, hey guys, we were told a story about this, but this isn't actually how the world works. And that powerful man is trying to treat everybody as well as he can. But you got to understand, you're not going to put your special little flower in there in his place. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Well, you have the whole idea of states' rights. I mean, which is, I would say, semi-functional in the United States. Like you have,
I don't know about that.
Course, right? So, I mean, how to improve it though, right? Like, what is not to your liking specifically, like in the United States right now?
Well, I would suggest that our country is controlled by a uniparty, that the Democrats and Republicans are essentially the same thing on all the issues and policies and cultural aspects that really matter. And you have an extreme end of the Democrat side of that uniparty that has made a lot of noise for the race stuff and the gender stuff. And it's been met with a significant backlash from inside that uniparty structure in a controlled opposition sort of way. And that what we need actually exists outside of that uniparty, because, our elections aren't real here. They're not real at the state level. They're not real at the federal level. Donald Trump, we can say, we don't need to get into like the specifics of these different elections, but Trump was coming back no matter what. That was never in doubt. They could not have sold us a Kamala Harris victory after she was not even properly nominated. The entire thing here is a sham. And one of my priorities on this podcast is to move us kind of past that, to recognize what that is, and then only maintain the parts that we really do believe in, because we had this original founding constitution that contained a set of ideals that are no longer present in the Constitution that we have now, which was, overthrown and inverted 160 years ago, changing our society from a republic into a democracy to focus on individual freedoms. It goes instead to equality. And the system itself, the directionality we talked about before between kind of Enlightenment, scientific materialism, etc., and the more Renaissance, spiritual, godly version, we're going back and forth between that thing. Trump's here now, thank goodness. But I would just prefer that we recognize the traditional form for what it is, understand that the enemy had possession of that, and that we need to extract possession of that. And, the form of government is secondary.
Well, some people argue that the deep state basically changed course, and they realized there's really no chance to stick with a woke agenda and to stick with Kamala and all the insane Democrats. So they realized like the way forward is really MAGA. Basically, it is Trump. It's a total course correction. So I think the deep state. Well, some people argue that the deep state basically allowed Trump to win another term, basically, right? And
I would say they had no choice, because they're being met with a more powerful force aligned with other more powerful forces in the world. But I agree with you that they had no other option. And so now they're trying to just kind of cling to Trump and MAGA, ride out these next 4 years, subverting him in every way possible, and then retake control after that.
Well, I was just going to address that, actually. I find this very problematic with the American system. I mean, I sort of agree with you that there's a uniparty. There's hardly any difference between Republicans and Democrats. You don't really have a multi-party system. Well, you have more than two parties, but the other parties don't matter. So really, it's a two-party system. I mean, nobody cares about the Green Party in the US, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's Democrats, Republicans, of course. Now, with MAGA in power, and what you just said, like, your theory that the deep state is trying to subvert Trump as much as possible and then take control again after the 4 years and install another liberal puppet, I'm not so sure that's possible, because some people say that the people of the United States, as we discussed earlier, I mean, 80% are basically behind MAGA. I mean, or at least against that woke insanity, the liberal bullshit. Basically, they can't stand it because it's madness, basically. And I think the deep state has to recognize this, that the tide is now shifting irreversibly towards a more traditional conservative mindset. So to install another liberal person like Biden or Obama, some puppet, would be completely counterproductive to the interests of the deep state, even if it wants to stay in power.
I would agree with that, but I would also say that the plan wouldn't be then to install a new liberal in 2028. They would just run Kamala Harris again and allow J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis or someone else, not Donald Trump, who is fully under control, to retake the reins of power in the country. But that person is then like a full embodiment of the Republican establishment that MAGA has been fighting for so many years. Because it's not just that MAGA took over the Republican Party and now the Republican Party has become MAGA. It's that there is an ideological war between MAGA and the Republican Party. Donald Trump uses the Republican Party as a political vehicle in this country because we are unable to shake the illusion of bipartisanship. But in reality, taking Trump out, anyone who is not just 100% trustworthy MAGA telling the truth to the people, that's not going to work because people are accustomed to the Trump standard now. So I think that what the deep state, what the regime, in the way I would describe it, would do after Trump, assuming there is an after Trump, and I don't assume that, I think that they would put in someone from the uniparty right who identifies very strongly with MAGA, who MAGA will approve of enough to agree that that can be their guy now. And they can ride that through pretty easily, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So I think in my opinion, the main issue is for MAGA to become dynastic. Yes, because if it's like 4 years of Trump and then another Democrat, I mean, it was all for nothing basically, because they will just reverse everything, reverse course. And I've discussed this several times with other people that the political system in the United States, it's basically bipolar, and I mean in a clinical sense, right? So you have like this euphoric 4 years of Trump, where everything's great, the golden age and all that stuff. But then you have another person like Biden, basically like woke insanity, liberal bullshit, the unraveling of all the conservative values for 4 years. And then people get sick of that. And then they vote another person like Trump into power. It's sort of like revolving chairs. It goes back and forth. It's sort of schizophrenic. And a lot of countries, I mean, the Russian government said this a couple of months ago, that the United States is basically incapable of making agreements, international agreements. And I completely agree. I mean, the United States government cannot be trusted on an international level because you have one administration signing sort of like an agreement with another country, but the next administration will just rip it up, like Trump did with the agreement that Obama signed with Iran, for example. Yes. So, I mean, internationally, it's problematic, and people know nothing is really long term. And I think this is also the case why Iran is very reluctant to come to terms with the Trump administration, because they know that it's only short term. It's 4 years, and nobody knows what will happen after these 4 years. So there's really no long term stability. And some people say that governments like the Russian one, for example, where Putin's been in power for like over 2 decades, are superior to some extent because there is more ideological continuity, and therefore there's more room for progress and growth. Because if you have like 4 years of the golden age, if you have progress and growth, but then it is suddenly halted by another insane Democrat, then you have devolution again. You have to start from scratch after the next 4 years. And it's like progress, halt, back, and so on, right? While in other countries, it's not like this. You just have one ideological line that can develop over time without these sudden schizophrenic shifts and interruptions. And I think this should be broken. I mean, this bipolar state of things, I mean, it should not continue like this. And that's why, in my opinion, it is imperative that MAGA somehow become dynastic, that you will at least make sure that you have several administrations to really secure the culture in its new foundation. Otherwise, it will be just ripped out again if it's only 4 years. It's not enough to solidify the foundation, the new, I would say, conservative, traditional foundation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with that. And I think that a lot of MAGA, and maybe most importantly, in terms of our media environment, Steve Bannon, who seems to be kind of our Alexander Dugin, that's how I describe Dugin often, as Russia's Steve Bannon. He is fully committed to talking about Trump being president again in 2028. And you said a funny word there, devolution. That's a key word in kind of the Badlands media thought space, because we believe that some form of continuity of government was operational in the United States during this Biden term. He never really seemed to know what was going on, nor did anyone in his administration. He never seemed to have any control whatsoever over the military. You've probably heard the story about the auto pen and his dementia, but the truth is he was just never actually elected. That, the 2020 election was stolen, And as in Trump's position as president, the idea would be then that he can't simply walk away and hand the country over to people who steal elections and are serving actually a global foreign power with the needs antithetical to the needs of the American people. So instead, we're going to go to some sort of continuity of government program where the federal bureaucracy kind of has its ability to continue operating in the form it was before, but that's not really a constitutional form in the first place. So that continuity of government program would have been the backstop behind all of the chaos they attempted to cause. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Well, I like Steve Bannon a lot. I follow him. I listen to what he has to say, and I'm mostly in agreement with what he says, to be honest. I mean, that would be ideal to have Trump again. He might be too old, though, and we don't know what state he's going to be in. We're not even going to sure if he's going to make it that long, to be honest. But even if he does, he's not going to live forever. You will need to start talking about succession already, basically, right? So I know I'm not really opposed to JD Vance as 48, to be honest. I've been quite impressed with what he's been saying, like in Munich and the comments on X. The speech in Annapolis was spectacular at the Naval Academy a couple of weeks ago, where he basically admitted that we're now in the age of multipolarity, because he basically said that the time of America being an uncontested power on the world stage, it's over. And he's correct, of course, right? And I think a lot of Americans are realizing this now. And Marco Rubio said the same thing a couple of months ago when he said that we now basically live in a multipolar world. So America does not have the power that it used to have. And that's why it needs to become more isolationist and focus on itself than on the world at large, basically, I think.
I would agree with that. In terms of JD Vance, my concerns about him aren't that I would agree with you that he is expressing the proper ideology when he expresses an ideology. Again, I would say I don't think he goes far enough on some really critical subjects. But in terms of multipolarity, the reason that I'm primarily concerned about JD Vance is that I worry he could be part of that same establishment, because I think that there's two ways multipolarity can go. I think that multipolarity is an inevitability, but I also think that there is a version of that that is even further fragmented, the kind of the Curtis Yarvin patchwork idea where, you know, the elites and the oligarchs in the world, if they want to buy a bunch of property, set up their own totally autonomous society, that's going to be the way to go. And I guess it's possible that he might be right down the line, but it's strange to me that the people aligning with that ideology are almost primarily elitists, primarily the same establishment people before, not authentically MAGA, and totally committed to techno-futurism.
Yeah, I don't think it's a contradiction, though. And I think a lot of them obviously are opportunists, like Zuckerberg, for example.
Yes.
I mean, when he recently said that it wasn't really his fault that Facebook censored, it was the regime's fault, and he couldn't really do anything about it, and now it's going to be different. Now he's going to have real free speech on Facebook, which is, of course, total nonsense, because people are still getting banned left and right. I mean, just like, I think last week, Martin Sellner, the Austrian activist, reported that like hundreds of like European right-wing conservative activists and groups have their accounts deleted on Facebook. So I mean, Arktos was banned from Facebook a year ago. Same with YouTube. Like, we had a very successful YouTube channel. I think 2 years ago. We lost our YouTube channel a year ago. We lost the Facebook account. Well, Facebook is dead anyway. It's like a boomer cemetery. So it's not really a big loss, to be honest. But I think that not all of them are necessarily opportunists. I think a lot of people are really sick of how far the liberals went, because you have to differentiate between liberalism 1.0 and liberalism 2.0. Because I think Trump is a liberal, right? But he's I would say it's a classic liberalism 1.0, what basically most Americans believed in until the 1980s, 1990s even. Top Gun, Back to the Future liberalism, basically. That's Trump, right? But the liberalism 2.0 is a liberalism infused with the utter insanity, deranged nonsense, like I don't know, bearded ladies or men participating in women's sports and coming home with gold medals, and I don't know, giving hormone therapy to children, having a whole month dedicated to some sexual abnormality. I mean, all of this is just going too far. And I think a lot of them actually had a change of heart. They don't want to go that far. They want to stay liberal, but want to stay liberal within certain social norms and bounds. And I think this is why a lot of them sincerely now support MAGA. And I think Elon Musk, of course, again, like you say, like nobody's perfect. I mean, I know JD Vance is not perfect, and he doesn't go far enough. Nobody's perfect, right? And I think Elon Musk, of course, is also not perfect, but he's doing a lot of good things, and he says a lot of good things, and he does have massive influence. Like when he criticizes like Western Europeans, the Western European leadership and their shenanigans nonstop. And it causes massive outrage in Western Europe. Like the media is full of it. I love it. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. So, and I think a lot of them really mean it when they say it. So I'm a bit more optimistic than you, I would say. And I think that, I mean, the whole idea of technocracy is not necessarily negative either, because you can view it from a sort of archaeo-futurist angle, because the genie is out of the bottle anyway. Talk about Nick Land and accelerationism, right? I mean, it's already here, artificial intelligence, and it's not ever going to go away again. It will stay, and it will progress, and at a very, 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 very fast rate, and it will massively change everybody's lives very, very soon. I mean, it already has, but it will be even more so. It's in the very near future, because the transformation or the speed of transformation is exponential. The more it develops, the faster it becomes.
My favorite chapter of your book was the one on archaeofuturism. So I'm glad that you brought that in. My concern about people like Elon is not that they have not adopted the right values. It's that ultimately, and I'm not putting this on Elon, I'm just saying it's a concern. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I try to divide along the lines of scientific materialism as opposed to faith-based orientation when it comes to morality and when it comes to where we see the country going and where we want the world to go. And I think that that's very much in line with what you lay out in the book in terms of returning to traditional values. It's not that I want a theocracy or the state religion to be in place, but if I'm going to be participating in empowering leaders with considerable public voice and public influence, I want to know that they're not ultimately trying to upload their minds to the machine and live forever.
Well, right, yeah. Even though I have to say, there's not necessarily anything wrong with uploading your mind into a machine, if that's what you choose, right? I mean, if that ever becomes a possibility and it's a choice, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with it, to be honest. But we'll see, right, if it will become possible. Some people believe it will, some people believe it won't. I actually believe that it will become possible, just not sure when. I mean, this whole idea of uploading consciousness into some sort of like virtual reality program, and you have the whole idea of transhumanism. And I know a lot of people on the right are like up in arms about it. But I think transhumanism has been around for decades. I mean, people have heart transplants, they have artificial limbs, I mean, isn't that already transhumanism? It's like when people say, oh, we don't want to use ChatGPT, we don't want to use the large language models, it's cheating, it's no good, etc. But isn't the same with, say, spell check on Word or using Grammarly, for example? I sort of compare these people who are so adamantly opposed to what is happening now with artificial intelligence to the Luddites in the Industrial Revolution in Manchester, when basically the weavers were out of business, out of work because of the textile industry, right? And they burned the machines, but it didn't stop the progress. It didn't stop the advance of the machines. The machines still took over, and regular person weavers didn't come back in vogue, to be honest. So the same is happening now. You just basically have to accept it. And that's how it is, because the technology is here, it's not going to go away. So you have to basically follow the Italian philosopher Julius Evola's sort of motto when he said that we live in this modern world and we cannot escape it. So we have to ride the tiger, basically. So you have to harness the technology. It shouldn't control you. You should control it, without wanting to abolish it or without rewinding the clock. And that's what archaeofuturism is all about. Basically, you should embrace technology because it can help you, it can help your people, it can help society. And it can bring us closer, especially in the West, to our Faustian destiny. Because Western man, is inherently a Faustian being. And what does it mean? It means that Western man is never satisfied with the status quo. He always looks for new frontiers, always wants to go further, always wants to expand. That's why really all the great explorers in human history were pretty much all from the West, like Neil Armstrong on the moon, Christopher Columbus discovering America, or the Vikings, Leif Erikson. Before Columbus, the British Empire expanding across the entire globe, that the sun never sets on the British Empire, all that stuff. I mean, this is inherently part of the Western character. And I think Elon Musk personifies it today because he keeps that dream alive, the Faustian dream of Western man, with his idea or his project of colonizing Mars. And I think it's very, very important to have this project, because especially for young people, because it is really something to look forward to. It's some adventure. It is a frontier. It's an undiscovered country, basically, the new undiscovered country. And at the same time, Elon Musk is not a woke liberal. And I think he is sincere in his opposition to woke liberalism, especially considering what happened to his child when he lost his child, his son, right, to the transgender nonsense. And I think he's sincere. So I think he's sort of epitomizes what archaeofuturism is all about. You keep the values that made society strong, enduring values or enduring traditions, but you don't reject progress. You accept it, especially technological progress. You embrace it, especially if it propels you forward to new experiences and new spaces, especially in the area of the cosmos. That's where Elon Musk wants to go.
I don't know if you are familiar with who General Stephen Quast is. He was on a podcast by this host called Sean Ryan a couple of weeks ago. I would highly recommend it. He is a mentor to those of us at Badlands and attends our conferences and whatnot. But he is he runs a company called Space Built. They're in the space industry, which I think is, much more expansive than quote unquote outer space. I think it's about cyberspace, the information technology. And I also think it's ether, but that's just me. But he is very tech optimistic, but to the extent that our technology remains seen as a tool and not our entry point to some utopia. The idea that we are very clear about what is and isn't godly while embracing these new parts of the world?
Well, the argument could be made that it is sort of godly and it is natural because technology was essentially created by humans. And since humans are an integral part of nature, everything we do is natural. So,
but
even
for instance, seeking eternal life on earth as opposed to seeking eternal life in heaven, you have the material, the worldly to the godly. You have that. These are polar opposites ultimately. And when looking at the technology, one of them can be the same technology can be used in a way that is godly or ungodly, or worldly, as I said. And I think that's how I would make the distinction.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think eternal life is ever going to be possible. I mean, life extension is most definitely possible, and it will happen. You will have radical life extension. I mean, that's actually a term, like radical life extension. I mean, you have like the whole cryonics movement where people basically have their bodies frozen after physical death in the hopes of being resurrected at some point in the future when technology has advanced far enough. I don't think that actually qualifies as immortality, though, or wanting to achieve immortality. That's just basically life extension. And it's the same with what has been happening again for decades or even centuries with the advance of medicine. I mean, in the Middle Ages, I mean, you had like certain illnesses, you were dead. Right now you have the same illnesses, you just take a couple of pills and they disappear. Right. I mean, isn't that the same thing? That's already life extension, already extended our life by decades. So you have these ideas where people want to extend their lives, maybe even hundreds of years into the future. I don't think it's going to be possible to live forever. I mean, that's not ever going to be possible, because I guess eventually the universe or our galaxy will cease to exist, and then we will also cease to exist, right? So I'm not really that opposed to it, not even from a religious or spiritual perspective, to be honest, because I don't really see a contradiction necessarily.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess just in the kind of outside extreme case where you could upload your consciousness to the machine and then continue living consistently in various, biotechnological bodies. There have been some movies and some television shows about a concept like that. I mean, if you are just always only that consciousness existing and taking on physical form after physical form so that you can just keep going for as long as you want to and then ultimately decide to die, that's a strange existence as far as I'm concerned.
Very strange. No, I would agree. It's definitely strange. Not sure if it's going to be possible, but yes, yeah, it's not normal to want something like this. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea or the whole concept of consciousness is quite interesting, to be honest. I mean, you have the idea of soul. Like, religious people believe there's a soul. Like, the physical body dies, the soul goes to heaven or to some other kind of afterlife. But then you also have like some parapsychologists who study the notion of consciousness and survival of consciousness after death. And quite interesting, there's the University of Virginia that they have this, what is called the Division of Perceptual Studies, where they've been for several decades now, where they've been studying like near-death experiences and reincarnation studies, where they basically visit children all over the world and interview them, children that claim to have lived a previous life, basically. And they've collected thousands of these cases, and some of them are very convincing, to be honest. I mean, I've been studying this now for several years and read all kinds of books on it. And I mean, these are serious scientists doing it. They're not like some strange gurus or religious people or hippie spiritual types. I mean, they're very grounded. I mean, it's a real department at a respected university in Virginia. And some of it is very interesting. I mean, what they say about consciousness surviving after bodily death. We don't really know exactly what happens, but they're definitely certain things that are worth considering when it comes to this topic. So the whole idea of wanting to, what you just said, of forcing the same consciousness to exist in different physical incarnation is sort of like torture. Yes, that's probably true. And it might also be true that, well, some people argue that if your body dies and you have it sort of frozen, like with a whole cryonic system, that even when that body is somehow reanimated, the consciousness won't be in the body because it will already have moved on, some people argue.
Well, that's quite interesting. I thought maybe we could get into, along the lines of the archaeofuturism idea, what you mean by, and this is for the audience, I know it's laid out pretty well in your book, but what you mean by the Holy Roman Empire of the future.
Oh, well, that's just wishful thinking on my part, basically. It's sort of my
Wishful thinking is good. We should have ideals that we're aiming for.
And it's what's absolutely necessary, because you have to keep some sort of optimistic attitude to keep going. So the new Holy Roman Empire, and it's not actually the Roman Empire, but the Holy Roman Empire, because the Holy Roman Empire started with like Charlemagne, the Carolingians, you know, the Holy Roman Empire, where you basically had the unity of the corporal and the spiritual. You had the emperor, you had the pope, and there was sort of like a perfect symbiosis. And I use it as a sort of example because it exemplifies a society in which the materialism, in which the materialist aspect is not as important as the spiritual aspect, because in the Middle Ages, nothing was more important, nothing was considered more important than the immortality of the human soul. And everything, the entire literature, the entire culture of the Middle Ages was geared towards this particular goal of making sure that your soul lives forever in some form, basically. In the religious sense, of course, in the Holy Roman Empire, I think it was the Catholic Church, which also laid down the values, the foundations of spirituality and sort of behavior. So how people should behave, what makes a society great, where the emphasis should be in society. And I think feudalism in the Middle Ages as a system has been vilified, I think, unnecessarily so, because feudalism worked very well in the Middle Ages. Like you have the king, then you have the knights or the lords, you have the serfs. Like everybody basically knew their place, and the system worked to some extent very well. And I think it was never really abolished, because I think the feudal system is basically the natural system of humankind, and to some extent, like democracy, I would say communism, all different incarnations of it, because we always revert back to this sort of elite rule that we always decry. And then, I mean, you have like the Russian Empire. People decried the Tsar. They didn't like the Tsar. They revolted against the Tsar. They rebelled. Then they installed communism. And then you have the commissars and the apparatchiks, the Soviet elite, basically. So the elite's basically just getting replaced. But the feudalism as a system is basically the default system of mankind. And I mean, that's been proven throughout centuries. And in my vision in the book, the Holy Roman Empire would be a future Europe, basically, that is united, not fragmented into different nation states that basically compete against each other, but it would be like an imperial construct from Dublin to Vladivostok, so including Russia, like a super empire, basically, that would span like over 10 time zones. And it would, of course, have a sort of state religion to instill proper spirituality and values in the populace. And through the use of propaganda, since we already discussed it earlier, people would be taught the importance of spirituality over matter, but at the same time, because it would be an archaeofuturist society, technology would still be used and it would be harnessed, but for the betterment of society. Like you could have, for example, recreations of the Roman Forum, where you could immerse yourself in ancient Rome through, I would say, augmented reality, where you could be in actual Rome, but through the use of augmented reality, through various devices that you could wear, you could feel that you're in the middle of Rome. And through this immersive environment, you could learn a lot about your past, because the value would be placed on the collective and not on the individual, meaning the good of the collective is more important than the good of the individual, meaning the good of your people. And when I'm talking about your people, it's not like abstract humanity, but it would be your ethnic group, your cultural compatriots, so to speak. And you would feel close to them, and you would also be willing to sacrifice a lot for the collective, because this value or this mindset of wanting to sacrifice for the greater good would be instilled at a very young age, something that is not done today, because today the focus, in the United States or in the Western world at large, is always on the individual only. Like, you should only basically think what is good for you. You should never think what is good for society at large. What is good for you is the highest value. And people always say, well, but it's freedom, especially libertarians. They say, yeah, but that's what true freedom is, like, what is good for me as long as they don't hurt anybody else, right? But that's, in my opinion, the wrong ideal. The right ideal that should be instilled in the people would be the ideal of what is good for me, but also what is good for my people, yes, as a whole. That's the kind of mentality people should have. And I think this kind of mentality can really only be achieved through religious fervor, through some kind of religious instruction. And that's why I think religion is of prime importance. And that's why it would be a Holy Roman Empire, because the main focus would be on religion and spirituality. And it would obviously be Christianity, because Christianity is the true religion of the West. And nothing else is at the moment. And nothing ever will be, obviously, because it's been so firmly implanted in Western consciousness and in the Western mind that it's almost synonymous with the West. Hilaire Belloc, the Catholic writer, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically said that Europe is the church and the church is Europe, and he was absolutely right.
So that's interesting then, because we have the religious model married to then the feudalist model, both of these representing a more natural order. And then on top of that, the push and pull that we've talked about gets layered on the democracy or potentially communism or fascism or whatever the brand names they put it under. All of that is the reversion to the state away from the church. And we begin, and I don't even mean the church formally or whatever, the church in this case can stand in for that cultural religious fervor. You got to push and pull between that and the state. And it seems like we've been committed to the state for a really long time, which in my estimation is only left wing. Like, you can't be a right-wing statist, right? You're moving away from statism by going right, but returning to these cultural values. And I think that these fragmented societies, even the notion of feudalism, I'm not necessarily put off by, these fragmented societies where they are governed by a monarch potentially, or some small council, but probably a monarch, because otherwise you end up getting toward the democracy idea. That's a way to instill the kind of culture you're talking about, so long as the people inside that system are allowed to exit for a different system.
Yeah, but if you had, say, a Holy Roman Empire, there would be no other system into which people could exit. Yes. Mm-hmm. So even if you disagreed with the system, you would have to make your peace with it, because there would be no other option. Yes. And I would say that this is the ideal way, because if you want to have a society that benefits the majority, then it needs to be a society which has no real alternatives, because it considers itself to be the almost perfect society. So it could be maybe reformed from within, but definitely not from without. And I think this is the main idea of multipolarity, that there are no outside powers that have the right to impose their values on somebody else whose values are inconsistent or are different from the other person's value or the other entity's values.
All right, let's go ahead and do this. We can take a break. I can play an ad. We can get a drink of water, and then I will see you in 2 minutes. Does that sound good?
All right, great.
Awesome.
Big Pharma is officially on notice.
People drinking methylene blue and stuff like that.
Yeah, methylene blue, which was a fabric dye.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a textile dye. And now they find it has profound effects on your mitochondria.
Yep.
Yeah.
This stuff works, man.
Do you know about methylene blue? Originally synthesized over 100 years ago, we are just finding out about its benefit as a supplement with its ability to help oxygenate the blood and amplify our mitochondria. People all around the world are using methylene blue to accelerate their brain power and support their energy levels. Conscious Strength. Methylene blue is pure USP grade, aqueous solution. Click the link to learn more and shop Conscious Strength now.
By now, you've probably seen the new collab between Rise and Badlands Media, but I'll tell you what you haven't seen yet. The end of Clown World as we know it. But have no fear. Introducing the latest addition to the Badlands INTL lineup, the sequel to the best-selling Psy-War series. We've been conditioned by these clowns to accept their circus. But it's time to unwind that and strike them out the history books. The future belongs to the real, and we've got it in droves. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/rise for the full line of premium and direct-to-garment streetwear. Made to order right here in the good old US of A, the heart of the resistance. The fall of Clown World is upon us, patriots. Let's make it official.
All right, we are back. So we were just talking about the Holy Roman Empire and that essentially being a super state that dominates a massive land mass, and then probably the seas that would protect that land mass. And I guess under your vision, we would have a number of those in different areas of the world. But so my question is this: if we have that arrangement and we have this perfect state, more people are going to want to join that state potentially and associate with that culture, as kind of the satellites to the west and the south of Russia might have done at various points in the past. What prevents a super state of that magnitude from going and trying to take over and dominate other lands that don't want to be a part of the superstate? Is that an inevitability? Do we have something like the Monroe Doctrine, where we have these certain regions of authority or responsibility? Do we go back to the Treaty of Westphalia and just maintain a strict international respect for state sovereignty? What do you see that being?
Well, I see a brutal multipolarity arising, and I think small states basically have no chance, especially states with no sovereignty, like when, for example, Trump talks about taking Greenland, and then Denmark protests. But who's Denmark really, right? Like, what's Denmark going to do? Like, if Americans march into Greenland tomorrow and declare American soil, there's nothing really Denmark can do about it, because Denmark has neither the power nor the means to do so. So it is not a sovereign country, and non-sovereign countries or nations don't really matter anymore. So what the only entities that matter are the civilization states, the empires. And of course, the Monroe Doctrine is an ideal, in my opinion, and there should be a Monroe Doctrine for all spheres of influence, not only the American one. So Russia has a sphere of influence, of course, the former Soviet states all in it, in my opinion. China certainly has a sphere of influence. Taiwan is in it. To some extent, Japan, Philippines, maybe. I mean, America certainly has a sphere of influence. I would say both North America, I would definitely North America, to some extent South America as well. So Monroe Doctrine, yes, for sure. And I look at it from an imperial perspective, because you said, like, what's going to prevent like a large state from just incorporating a smaller state? I would say, well, nothing's really going to prevent a large state from doing this unless another large state protests, and there might be a conflict then between the two large states, as probably would be the case with Taiwan, right? So if China wants to incorporate Taiwan, United States might protest, and then you have a conflict between China and the United States, possibly, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think there's no chance of that, by the way. But
right,
we'll see.
But, hypothetical scenario,
yeah,
right?
Yep.
But my point is not necessarily a bad thing, right? To be swallowed by the larger entity, if the larger entity has a proper imperial structure and practices ethnopluralism, as did the ancient Roman Empire. So the ancient Roman Empire, you had different nations, different ethnicities within it. Like you had Judea, you had Germania, but all of them were allowed to practice their customs, speak their language, celebrate their traditions. The only thing that they were required to do was pay their respects to the Roman Emperor, and that's it, basically. Other than that, they were quite autonomous, which is a good thing, right? I mean, the same is pretty much the case in the Russian Federation today. So you have Chechnya, which is basically an Islamic territory within Russia, and it's also autonomous. It is a part of Russia, but in their territory, they can pretty much do their own thing. And in my opinion, this is how a proper empire has to function, and how a proper empire has always functioned. You have the instead of the melting pot idea that you uphold in the United States, in which you say that like we take these different ethnicities and different peoples, we throw them in one pot, we stir, and out comes the American everyman. Yes. So instead of this, you have the imperial idea of ethnopluralism, where you basically respect the integrity of different ethnicities and peoples, and you don't interfere in their development. They are not independent, they are part of your jurisdiction, but you give them enough freedom to live as they please, basically, in their respective region. While, of course, they have to respect the integrity of the empire, so they cannot harbor any ideas of secession or breaking away from the empire.
Yeah,
I think it's the ideal model.
It could be. It could be. I guess it then just would depend what the governance model. I guess you're saying that there's the necessity to respect these various cultures. I just wonder if what we see now from the global regime broadly is this idea that these cultures are all independent, but still, you know, what your culture needs to have is quote unquote democracy. So they put that system on all of these cultures. And I know that your model precludes something like that happening, but yeah, I guess that's the concern with that model, that it would end up just skewing, and it's a slippery slope argument, but skewing that direction eventually.
Well, I'm not a Democrat myself. I don't believe in democracy. I don't think we have democracy anywhere. Like it's a sham. Like people say they believe in democracy. They say that certain countries are democratic, but when you point out, like, well, is this democratic? Is that democratic? They're completely out of words. So, I mean, it simply doesn't work, and it is not an efficient system of government. So I'm not saying, and it's definitely not for export. And since we're talking about multipolarity, like one region's, or say one empire's ideas of governance are not necessarily for export. Like, you should not impose your values and your ideas on other people's. And I think that also means within one empire. So, I mean, you could have, for example, a completely liberal capital, right? But then you could have certain autonomous republics within the empire that have Sharia law, for example, or some kind of theocracy, right? And I think it could be tolerated, yes, from the center, as long as they don't rebel against the imperial laws and regulations. And to some extent, it already works like this in different parts of the world. Like, again, I would say the Russian Federation, like Chechnya, is almost like some Islamic republic within Russia. And Russia itself is not, of course, but it's tolerated because they don't really interfere and with the workings of the federal state as a whole. So it could perfectly function, in my opinion, and it does function. It has functioned throughout human history, so there's no reason why it shouldn't happen again.
That was the original purpose behind the Union of States that is now known as the United States. You know, all of the states were their own nations with their own cultures and their own practices, and they were kind of forming exactly the model that you're discussing. And then, of course, we had global influence that has obliterated that model and made it its opposite. But yeah, I think that's right on.
Well, since you mentioned earlier, you were talking about Hollywood and Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles last year in March, spent 2 weeks there, walked around extensively, right? Like, without a car, like literally walked about 20 miles a day up and down Los Angeles, different districts. I found it quite fascinating. So the reason I'm bringing up Los Angeles, because I would consider Los Angeles as a future of a Western city, and as a sort of like an archetype of a coming Western city, because it's basically a sort of ethno-pluralist city. Like what I'm talking about, an ethno-pluralist empire, I would say Los Angeles is sort of like an ethno-pluralist city, because you have sort of different districts. You have like the Mexican district, like East Los Angeles, that's where I stayed. So good taco, breakfast burritos, very nice. I don't know, hold on. Blood In, Blood Out, that movie, I don't know if you've seen it.
I don't know if I have, no.
Anyways, from the 90s, was a sort of like some Mexican gangster movie set in Los Angeles. Anyway, it was filmed where I stayed in Los Angeles in some taco joint, took some pictures. Anyway, so you have like the Mexican district, you have like Koreatown, you have Little Tokyo, Ethiopian district, the Indian place where all the Indians live. And in each of these districts, you have your own infrastructure. You have like in Koreatown, you have Korean lawyers, Korean supermarkets, Korean schools, and you actually do see mostly Koreans on the street. And if you go to Little Tokyo, you have the same with the Japanese. And well, the Mexicans, East LA, of course, is all Mexican, everything's in Spanish. And a lot of them just stick to their neighborhoods, basically, to their people, right? I mean, of course, you have some intermingling, you know, obviously. Yes, but overall, I would consider it sort of like a mosaic, sort of like an ethno-pluralist mosaic, Los Angeles. So quite fascinating.
Yeah, perhaps, but isn't that kind of then, because it's part of the empire, isn't it strange that there are these and it's not about the nationalities and the people themselves, but these different ideologies under that are, I would say in Los Angeles, firm rejections of what the empire's values in that scenario would be. And then I would also suggest, and I want to get your feedback on this, because, you know, we talk about global cities in America, global cities around the world, of course, where all the philanthropist and donor money floods in to create their kind of utopian vacation spot, while the populations of the cities are basically priced out of homes and unable to thrive in these locations. And then we talk about smart cities, the advent of the technological control grid laid on top of our urban environments. And Los Angeles seems to be fully on board with both of those programs, which is why I find it somewhat horrifying. It seems to be a protectorate of the inverted form of what you're talking about, if that makes sense.
Well, of course, it makes perfect sense, because the United States is not an empire yet. So it hasn't implemented what I think it should implement.
Okay.
So you have all the globalist trappings in place, because it's still being ruled by globalists, basically. They're still firmly in the driver's seat, especially in liberal California. So you're absolutely right with what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing at all. I was just looking at sort of like the makeup of the city itself. And I think certain structures that are now controlled by the globalists could easily be taken over by sovereigntists, like the European Union, for example. I mean, it's completely controlled by liberals, but it's basically a perversion of what true European values are. But the structure itself, I think, should not be gotten rid of. It should be kept, even if there were a power change tomorrow, because the idea of having a European superstate is, in my opinion, superior than having like a continent that is fragmented into different nation states. So you could easily just have the right people in charge of the European Union, and it could be a beautiful project.
Yeah, I wonder if that could ever happen.
Anything can happen.
Let's hope so. Yeah. I'm playing devil's advocate on many of these things. My audience knows that I am eternally optimistic about where we're going. I think that we're at the dawn of a Renaissance age. And I think that it really came out in your book, this separation as we move from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment. And I would like to just kind of have you run through your thoughts about that. And then let's discuss if we are headed back into that Renaissance, and maybe the difference in these two modes of our worldly and spiritual life combined. Maybe that's where the real distinction to be drawn is, and we're heading back now in the other direction.
I think we're definitely heading back, and I think all the trends point towards it. Like more and more people in the West are joining the Catholic Church. And from what I've read, for example, I'm not necessarily advocating Catholicism. I'm just using it as an example of traditionalism making a comeback, and especially among young people. And according to polls, both in Western Europe and the United States, it is mostly the younger generation that supports this conservative shift, not the older boomer generation. They're the ones holding us back, basically. Yes. So it is the young people that are demanding a return to something more fundamentally spiritual and traditional, away from the I would say the fleeting pleasures of the liberal present, so to speak. So if you look at the Renaissance, you had the flowering of culture all over Europe, architecture, painting, literature, everything. Then, of course, you had the Enlightenment, you had the French Revolution, and it all devolved. You had an actual process of devolution. Like, I would say, while you had a materialist progress to some extent, you had spiritual decay, because more and more people fell into the trap of the materialist worldview of believing that the here and now is all there is, and therefore my life is all that is important and nobody else's, and not the welfare of society. I think all of this is connected. individualism is basically a direct product of the falling away from the spiritual worldview, which originally made Europe great. And I think we can see a return to the spiritual worldview. And I saw it myself at certain events, that I attended in the United States last year, where I talked with a lot of young people, and all of them expressed fervent optimism in a sort of reawakened true American spirit, where it's not just not just a conglomeration of individuals, but you have like a real American people, where America is not an idea, as some people say, right? Like, what is it? That Indian presidential candidate said this.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
Charlie Kirk actually said that too. The idea that any place can be America.
Yeah, but that's crazy and insane and stupid. Yeah. And I'm totally opposed to this, because I think America is not an idea. America is an actual place, and there are actual people called Americans that call this place their home, right? Yeah. And they should feel patriotic about it, because their ancestors made the place, so they should feel proud of it. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between settlers and immigrants, right? I mean, the settlers were the ones that built America. The immigrants are basically just the freeloaders that came after. Yes? So, I mean, I'm not talking bad about all immigrants, because a lot of immigrants are obviously very useful, right? But I'm talking about the whole liberal notion that everybody was an immigrant in America, and there's no difference between like the millions of Mexicans or South Americans crossing the border from the people that came with the Mayflower. Basically, everything's equated in the liberal mindset. And I think, again, this is a direct result of the Enlightenment, basically. So basically, we have to go back to a more, I would almost say, a more medieval mindset. Yes, yeah. But a medieval mindset that is not blinded by pure dogmatism, but sort of offset with technology that works for the benefit of the people.
I think that's a good vision. That's a sound vision. I can get on board with that. You talk about, to just switch subjects a little bit and kind of stay in the same mental space. You talked about, you did a chapter on Africa and the changes that are occurring in Africa. We don't talk about Africa a heck of a lot in the United States, generally speaking, but throughout 2024, I essentially committed myself to a few specific subjects, and one of them was elections all around the world. And so it's kind of been something that I've been following for a few years, but then very particularly last year. One thing I've noticed in Africa specifically over the last few years is that we have an end to the European and American colonial influence in many of these countries, and not necessarily the presence or the control, but the military and logistical backing of Russia and China. And those nations that have removed that global element have now essentially spanned a land bridge across the wide section of Africa. And so I wonder what you think might be the future down there.
Well, hopefully the decolonization process that has started in Africa and is now in full swing will continue until it's finalized, until Africa truly becomes free of the insidious Western influence and the Rudyard Kipling's white man's burden, right? Because basically, as I also write in my book, liberalism is basically white supremacism, because in the past, you had the British Empire, for example, wanting to go to the dark corners of the world and educate the quote-unquote savage on the glory of Western civilization, basically, and save him from his own savageness, basically, and even against his own will. Yes, and I think the same kind of mentality still exists with Western liberals today, as you mentioned earlier, because they still want to export their vision of the world, gay rights, democracy, and feminism, basically all over the world, whether the peoples of the world want it or not. It's all for their benefit in the liberals' mind, right? And this was the case in Africa. Of course, in Africa, you also have the natural resources, which are wanted by everybody, especially countries like France, for example. And you have a sort of like a new sort of decolonization movement in Africa right now, in which the Africans are actually actively fighting against this neo-colonialist influence that countries like France still exert on the African continent. And I think when you mention Russia and China, like you have like the Wagner Group in Africa and the Russian presence in Africa right now, I think it is different than, say, the French presence in Africa, because the Russians are actually welcomed as liberators to some extent from sort of this insidious Western influence.
I would say that exactly the same way. I think that's the crux of what's happening right now. And they are being greeted as liberators because they represent the possibility of returning to that form, that more natural state than what the global regime was kind of putting on top of them. I wonder if you think, so we kind of tossed this idea around, and I think some of us are pretty committed to it on the Badlands Network. The idea of a, for lack of a better term, sovereign alliance, like that all these various sovereign nationalist leaders around the world are working in some level of coordination to help these individual countries remove that global influence and then prop their own societies back up. And so we'll talk about Donald Trump. And it's not that they're colluding on elections and stuff like that. It's that they have a common understanding about where the world is going. And Donald Trump is not going to interfere with what Putin's trying to do, not going to interfere with what Xi is going to try to do, or Mohammed bin Salman, or Narendra Modi, or, I mean, I would even argue even Nicolas Maduro down in Venezuela. Is there, what do you think the scale of coordination and cooperation among these sovereign nationalist leaders is in ushering in the new multipolar world order?
I think such a collaboration certainly exists, because you have, for example, Trump never really chastising Vladimir Putin like other Western leaders have done. And that enrages the liberals all over the world. They can't handle it. It's like, oh, why is he not like calling Putin a war criminal? And why is he not calling Putin the new Hitler like we do, you know? So, and they can't stand the fact that Putin is basically treated with respect by Trump. And I think that these leaders, and they do meet quite often, actually, like you have Viktor Orban, Hungary's leader, was in Mar-a-Lago before Trump became president again, and has been there several times since. I mean, I think he was also at the inauguration party, as far as I know. As where, by the way, when I was in DC in January, I was at the pre-inauguration ball at the Watergate Hotel. But I met some people from the AfD in DC, and they were invited to the actual inauguration. And interestingly enough, like at the inauguration ceremony in DC, I think only a delegation from the AfD was invited, and maybe one from the CDU, but none from the Social Democratic Party, which was actually in power at the time in Germany. So I found that quite interesting, right? So obviously, the Trump administration favors the AfD, even though the AfD is the opposition party. I mean, that was also evident after J.D. Vance gave a speech in Munich when he met Alice Weidel from the AfD at his hotel, and they had like a talk. I don't know about different topics after, but he didn't meet anybody else, right? I mean, not even representatives from the ruling government at the time. So, I mean, that clearly sent a signal that the interests of the Trump administration, and I'm talking about the ideological interests, are closely aligned with those of Viktor Orban in Hungary and the AfD in Germany and various other patriots. I mean, Saudi Arabia, you mentioned it, is another good example, and also Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia, which again underlined the multipolar nature of the president when he basically gave credit to the Arabs. Basically said that you created this society. It was you, not the meddlers. I don't remember his exact words, so I'm just paraphrasing. So he said not the meddlers from the West, basically, the nation builders. So obviously he's talking about the neocons, right? Like quite openly he criticized the neocons who always, like Michael Ledeen, who's talking about creative destruction. It's like we have to come destroy their societies and rebuild them in our image. And Trump decried this in his speech in Saudi Arabia, which again clearly showed where his sympathies lie. So yeah, I do think they, if not openly, it's not like they meet in like some secret room, like a cabal or something, right, where they decide the fate of the world, but they certainly have sympathies towards each other and definitely act on them and support each other. And I think Trump's victory in the United States gave a huge impetus to the patriotic movement in Western Europe. Like it emboldened them, and it even helped them electorally, I would say.
Yeah, and it seems to be that there's a genuine kinship and respect from an American perspective, from Trump to these leaders and from these leaders to Trump. And I think that that's really important in terms of bringing this model about successfully. You talk at length about remigration, and I wonder if we can discuss remigration in some kind of parallel to deportation. Okay, because so it's the difference would then be just a matter of who's making the decision. Is the illegal alien in the United States, or even, you know, I know you would go further than this, people of cultural backgrounds who are legally American, would they choose to go back to these countries, or should it be something that is done by the state? Because we are about to potentially go into a phase of deportation because we've been destroyed by decades now of just mass illegal immigration. They talk that there's like 11 million. Then there are some people that are like, no, it's at least 30. But the truth is, in the last, 35 or so years, we have added 100 million people while our birth rate is declining. So that's an influx of other people. It can't be anything else, at least insofar as the population statistics can be trusted, and I doubt they can. But we're talking about deportation as the only solution, and maybe there's some kind of urged or incentivized remigration, or perhaps the deportation notion is a cover story to cover up the fact that people are going home and regardless probably going to be replaced by robots. So yeah, remigration versus deportation and what you see with the two of those.
Well, it's a very complex topic. And well, I can say that, well, let's talk about deportation. Like first, like deporting people, like, I don't know, illegals, like people who shouldn't be in the country because they're in the country illegally. So they're basically criminals because they broke the law by entering the country without permission. Yes, without a permit. So, I mean, if these people are deported, I mean, it's obviously lawful, right? Because they're illegal. I mean, they're illegals by definition. I think in the United States, like deporting them is not that difficult because, especially if they're Mexicans, because you share thousands of miles of border with Mexico. So you just have to dump them across the border, secure the border, make sure they don't come back, right? I think it is more difficult in Western Europe. So if you have like people from Afghanistan and Syria, for example, in France or Germany, and well, they shouldn't be there, right? and you want to deport them. So the question is logistics, is how do you actually deport them? So first, Germany does not share a border with Syria and Afghanistan. There are several countries in between, right? And so to deport them, you probably have to fly them back, right? Which is quite expensive, right? Like chartering a plane, then somebody has to fly the plane. And not only do you have to fly them back to Syria, Afghanistan, you also have to convince the Syrian Afghan governments to take them back, right? Because what if they don't want them back? You're going to force them on the Afghan government? How are you going to do that? How are you going to force them on the Afghan government? And if you have hundreds and thousands or even millions of these people in your country, and hypothetically you'd want to deport them, how many planes would you need to do that? How long would it take? So, I mean, the whole idea of deporting millions and millions of people is logistically not even possible, unfortunately, in my opinion. Right. So even in the United States, because you'd have to build like gigantic sort of centers or even camps where you hold them first, process them, and then deport them.
The funny thing is we kind of do have those, and they exist south of
right.
the border too,
Well,
because they've always processed people on the way in.
Right. But you need the personnel to do that too. I mean, I'm talking about in the United States, you don't have this personnel, you don't have the facilities on such a scale, because I looked at the deportation numbers of ICE ever since Trump came into power, and they're not very impressive, if you ask me. Right? They're very underwhelming. So it's like, I don't know, 1,000 a day or whatever, a couple of hundred. It's like nothing. So even if he's 4 years in power, he will end up deporting like 1 million people maximum. That's it. So that's like a drop in the bucket, and half of them will just walk right back across the border because the border is not secured anyway, right? So it's not like you have a giant wall like that stretches for thousands of miles between the US and Mexico. So even deporting them, what good does it do if they can just walk back the next day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but the same is true in countries like Europe, in Germany. So even if you kick them out of Germany, say to, I don't know, Poland or Czech Republic or whatever, there's no wall between Poland and Germany or between Czech Republic. They can just walk through the forest and they're back in Germany. That's it, right? So it's very, very problematic. So I think incentive-based remigration is more feasible, in my opinion. Basically, you take away the incentive of people coming to your country by not giving them free education, free healthcare, and pocket money, like Germany does now, right? Because now people come and they immediately get pocket money, free healthcare, free housing, free everything, free schooling for their children, free dental care, free everything, right? Of course, everybody wants to come. Like if I was living in a mud hut somewhere and I'd hear that there's all this things going on in Germany, I'd also want to go to Germany or Sweden, right? Or the United States. Like I can't even blame these people. Because these people that are coming, they're not the enemy. I've never viewed them as enemies, right? I've never even viewed them as invaders, because some people on the right, they say they're invaders, but they're not really invaders though, right? Because they are actually invited by our governments. So if your government invites somebody, they're not actually invading you, right? They're actually your guests, whether you like it or not, because your government that invited them. It's like you invite somebody to your house. You don't call him a burglar, right? If you open the door for him and you tell him to come in. So I don't blame the people, first of all, that come. I don't blame the immigrants. I mean, in most cases, I would say blameless, because, like I said, I would do the same if I was in their shoes, if the opportunities exist. So if you want incentive-based remigration, you have to take away these incentives. No freebies, basically. Then they wouldn't want to come, right? I mean, would you want to go to a country if the country offers you nothing? Why would you want to go there? You don't speak the language. Maybe you don't know anybody there. It's very cold. It's not the same climate, not the same food. It's not your people. You feel alien. You feel sad. You feel lonely, right? You feel alienated, quite literally. And you wouldn't want to go there. And I think a lot of them do feel alienated. Like if you have the Syrians and Afghans, for example, in Germany, they don't really like it here culturally. And I can't blame them. It's not their people. It's not their culture. It's not their food. It's not their music. So, but they come anyway. Why? Because they get all the free stuff. But if you take away the free stuff, hardly anybody would come, I think. And the people that would come, I think, would be quite valuable people with skills, people that can contribute to society, people that society can benefit from. So I'm on basically a merit-based immigration system would be ideal, because I'm not like against immigration out of principle. I mean, I have nothing against like importing people, skilled people, intelligent people that are of a net benefit to society. Yes. Unfortunately, is the case in the West now.
Yeah, I think all that is well said. I wanted to just propose that perhaps what's driving some of them to come, in addition to the incentives that they'll receive, is the fact that their homes, in many cases, have been economically devastated by the same global colonial power that will come in, attempt to take all of the resources, infiltrate the government to kind of give them a smoother glide path into being able to do that. And they can incentivize that infiltration and the businesses that build up around that new governmental structure, because of course they control the banks. They have the donor money flowing in from the global philanthropists and the rest of it. And so they come in and empower one part of society and then economically devastate another part of the native society. And then it's very easy at that point to drop an NGO into one of these African nations and begin recruiting who wants to come to America, who wants to come to Europe for all our free stuff. You hate your life here. I mean, we did it to you, but you hate it. So why don't you come to this new country? I mean, I think that that's probably what's behind a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yep.
I mean, you also have military conflicts which were instigated by the West, which destroyed countries like Syria, for example.
Yep.
So the West is definitely at fault here, right? The liberal Western system, the people that instigated these military adventures that destroyed the infrastructure of the various countries in the Middle East, for example. So again, I can't blame the people for wanting to come here, right? I mean, you do have unsafe areas, obviously, in certain parts of the world, which have become unsafe because of Western meddling. Yes. So the people fleeing these areas should not be the ones that are blamed. Yes. I mean, it's the whole liberal Western system that is really at fault, which needs to be overcome, and which, in my opinion, is being overcome now with the start of the Trump administration. So hopefully they keep going. And as we said earlier, hopefully it becomes dynastic. So the progress that we're making now is not interrupted or halted altogether.
All right. So I have one subject left. Oh, and then I want to talk about Nick Land, actually. So 2 subjects left, and accelerationism and the rest of it. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, you have a chapter in here on the currency. We talk about Bitcoin a fair amount. You're talking about BRICS. I wonder what is ultimately going to back BRICS. There's been some indication that it's going to be gold. I think there's also some substantial reasons to believe they're considering a Bitcoin backing for BRICS. And again, what we see is a pulling away from the SWIFT system, as you outlined, but from the global regime banking empire and influence sphere in the first place. I don't know whether or not you think that that's going to end up being Bitcoin, but I would suggest that I think perhaps Trump is also in the same way kind of coordinating and understanding these changes being made. So for instance, when he sanctions Russia really harshly, and it doesn't actually affect Russia in any negative way for any substantial period of time, what he's doing is giving them that extra push out of the global regime's banking apparatus toward their own self-sustaining internalized system. Russia and China are funding Bitcoin mining operations in some of these small countries in Africa and other places. And it's always in line with the BRICS notion. We have half the population and half the economy on board with the BRICS program. And it seems like there's something else going on there that our country is participating in as well.
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something like what you just said, especially with Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin might be the future for BRICS. It might enable BRICS to truly break away from the rule of the dollar. And I think it's inevitable. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, obviously. It's a long process because a lot of the BRICS member states are still heavily dependent on the West and the United States economically, so they can't just de-dollarize overnight. But I think it will happen. And I think it will happen because the West set a dangerous precedent, basically, with the sanctions. By constantly sanctioning countries that go against the political interests of the West has shown the world that it cannot be trusted with its money, basically. Yes. So you had Russians having assets in different countries in the West, in banks, in real estate, in the United States, in Western Europe. Then the conflict in Ukraine started, and the United States and the European Union, they basically just seized the assets, which means they stole the property of the Russian state and private Russian citizens, being it like, I don't know, yachts and apartments, houses, bank accounts, etc., and they're not giving it back. So people are wondering, like, if this is what's going to happen to me if I have some disagreement with the West, why would I invest any kind of money in the West? Like, I'd be crazy to do this. And I think a lot of people are realizing this now. And the same is true of the dollar, right? And as a world's reserve currency, people cannot trust it because the United States cannot be trusted, because it is using its monetary power for its own political interests, basically. And this is what basically made BRICS possible in the first place. And I think this process will definitely continue. And I think you're right with what you were saying about Bitcoin. It really opens up great opportunities to really break away from this globalist dollar tyranny, so to speak.
Yeah, it's actually not that much different than a former gold standard where countries would have, their currency within the country, but it's all backed by this common thing. I don't think that model is unusual. I think that it's workable. And the fact, if the Bitcoiners are correct, the fact that the ledger cannot be messed with, and that we actually now have a truth machine as opposed to trust us, we have this much gold, then we are talking potentially about the way to ultimately get out of that control apparatus and keep it gone.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Okay.
And it can happen soon enough.
I agree. And speaking of soon enough, so one of the things I find fascinating about Nick Land and accelerationism in general, accelerationism outside of just Land, I think that Land is the best. I think that, in terms of the Dark Enlightenment, there's an important separation between Land and Yarvin. I'm a Landian and not a Yarvinite or whatever you might say. But what I perceive right now is that everything the enemy to multipolarity, to that, that top-down centralized control system, everything they do for their own benefit and protection and fortification quickly blows up right in their faces, making the problem worse for them and advancing our side of that cause. I think that we are in a period of inevitability that strong, where they then only have the opportunity, if they have the power and can get away with it, to try to really wreck things or bring state violence, as you were talking about before, the police knocking on the door for speech violations and the rest of it. They would either even if they ramp that stuff up, though, it would still accelerate the process of people's revolt against that thing. And so I am not opposed to more of that coming up into the public consciousness. Obviously, I don't want people to be harmed by it, but I do think it's necessary to continue accelerating the awakening to that reality, because the solution, we're actually already moving toward the solution. The scary thing has already happened in some sense. And I think we need that acceleration to push us more quickly in that direction.
No, yeah, well, absolutely correct what you're saying. I mean, the enemies of multipolarity are even risking World War III. I mean, it's not just like the police knocking on private people's homes.
Sure.
I mean, they're literally risking nuclear holocaust, basically, to further their aims, to stop the process of what is going on. Yes, I mean, you can just recently see the escalation in the Ukraine conflict, for example, from the West. That they're really, really desperate, and they're trying to do everything to stop the inevitable. But as you said, it is inevitable. In my opinion, it cannot be stopped because it has already gained too much momentum, so to speak. It's like the ball is rolling way too fast to try to block it or to stop it from rolling somehow. And I think the whole facade of liberalism will completely collapse. Well, Nick Land says that you have the transhumanist future, basically, where basically machines will take over because AI will become so complex, so fast, especially if you have artificial general intelligence like AGI, where it is superior to the human mind, then we basically have no chance. And in this future, you won't have any wokeism or liberalism. Basically, it will be completely crushed. And I think we are already in the early stages of this. We can see it right now. Like I see it on X every day. Like when I go through like different accounts and I read the comments and everything. Like you have like the liberals, basically, the X accounts, or the woke politicians in Western Europe. And if you look at the comment section, there's hardly any positive comments about these individuals. They're always very scathing and extremely critical. And you see this everywhere online. It's basically what people truly feel. And I think it is at least half, if not more than half, also in Western Europe, who are already on board with this vibe change. I mean, in the United States, I think it is, you have a super majority, I think, that is in favor of this MAGA revolution. I think in Western Europe, we're not that close, but at least half, if not more. In certain parts of Western Europe, it is also the majority, like in East Germany, for example. But I think this process is pretty much unstoppable right now.
One other quick question, because you touched on Germany and the escalation in Ukraine. What is the German people's view of Friedrich Merz?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think it's 50-50. I think it's quite divided. Like a lot of people like strongly dislike him, but I think they disliked him even before the election. And there are certain people that were in favor of him before the election and are still in favor of him now, because right now the Christian Democratic government in Germany is enacting some measures against illegal immigration, like pushing people back at the border and having more checks at German border posts. I mean, these are all cosmetic interventions, in my opinion. They're not really stopping the flow of immigration at all. It's just for show, basically. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of people fall for it and actually believe that real change is underway. And that's why I think the general view is not even that negative of him as it was in the early days of his chancellorship, when it seemed like he wasn't going to do anything. Because right after he was elected, he didn't close the border on the first day as he promised, and he made certain statements that he really won't close the border, and people became very, very disappointed, to the point that the AfD in polls was the strongest party for a while. But now the CDU is ahead again, and the AfD, what I was going to say was that right after he got elected, he made certain statements where people got disappointed, so that the AfD became the strongest parties in the polls and not the CDU. But now again, it's reversed, and the CDU is on top again because of these cosmetic measures that he sells as radical measures in the mainstream media. So, I mean,
Do they take him seriously? Does he seem authoritative, like he's fully in control of the apparatus of government? Or does it seem like he's Joe Biden or Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron, one of these leaders that's kind of just the avatar of this global force, and that their power is fading?
Well, he's definitely an avatar. He's definitely like a Biden-like figure, but not to the general populace or to a large percent of the general populace. I think he is actually seen as a truly sovereign leader who stands up to Trump, the dictator, and Elon Musk, the evil, I don't know, Trump's Rasputin or Mephisto. Elon Musk is not very popular in Germany, and well, neither is Trump, to be honest. So, I mean, when people said, when Elon Musk, for example, supported the AfD, which I thought was great, a lot of people said it was not really going to help the AfD much in the German elections, simply because Musk is not that popular in Germany. I think that's a case could be made for this. It's really, really difficult for me to sort of gauge like real numbers, like how many people actually support the current regime and how many people are against it. In East Germany, it's very easy. In East Germany, it's the majority, I would say, of people for sure, like totally against it, totally on board with a vibe shift. In West Germany, I would almost say the opposite is true. I mean, just from the personal feeling I get, because I don't trust like the real numbers anyway. So maybe 50-50, or maybe 60% in favor of Merz and current ruling powers, maybe 40% against it. But again, it's just my personal guess here.
Yeah, that's all I wanted. That's perfect. Okay, so I'm going to let you get out of here. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Do you want to let people know where they can find your work and where they can follow you on social media?
Yeah, sure. So you can follow my personal Substack, which is eurosiberia.net. I usually publish 3 articles per week on history, culture, current events, politics, philosophy, from different perspectives. It's all my own writing on eurosiberia.net. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Arktos, and we also have a Substack, arktosjournal.com, on which we publish writings by a multitude of different authors from different countries, again, about a whole variety of topics. And you can order the Arktos books, including my books, Multipolarity with an exclamation mark and Esoteric Trumpism, on Amazon, but also on arktos.com, where you can also publish the other Arktos titles.
Great. Constantine, thank you so much for getting out of here. I'm going to let you go and then wrap up the show. So is there anything we missed? Are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right, great. Well, thank you again for taking the time. And I look forward to reading your work on Euro-Siberia.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everybody. So that was great. What a fantastic thinker he is. He's a wonderful writer. I suggest everybody take a look at his written work. Thank you all for tuning in on Badlands. Thank you for tuning in on my channel. If you do not follow my channels and you're watching on Badlands, you can find me at I'm Your Moderator on Rumble, on YouTube, on Truth Social, and you can go to t.me/veryreasonable to follow me on Telegram. I will also get to Rumble rants, of which there are a few. Trumpet on the Badlands channel, $20. Great discussion, but I am optimistic, and I think we can fight this. CIA and FBI dissolving will help our U.S. Constitution succeed with its given rules. I hope that you are right. I think that we need to go back to the original Constitution, but otherwise, I would agree with you. Divining Rod 555, $5 on my channel. Thanks for the discussion, Chris. Great guest. I agree. Great guest. Karamaga, $10. Thanks, Chris. Great show. Thank you very much, Karamaga. Thank you all for your support, and thank you all for tuning in, and I will potentially be back tomorrow. I'm thinking of doing an evening episode on Thursday because I will not be available on Friday. So that's to be determined. I will let people know. And otherwise, if that doesn't happen, I'll be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the very same Reasonable Podcast Network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.